Hey everyone! Today on the plastic canvas I'm going to show you some different ways that we can varnish our miniatures. Hey everyone, Matt here from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to the 9th episode of Anyone, Yes Anyone Can Paint Miniatures. In this series I'm taking you through each step in the miniature painting process to hopefully show you that painting minis is a lot more simple than what you think it may be, and that it's not just for those that have an artistic flair or that can paint to a really high standard. Anyone can do it. Now, in the previous episode of this series, I showed you some different ways that we can base our minis. If you haven't seen that yet, there is a link to it in the description down below. Now, that was the last step in actually finishing off our miniatures. So now we need to provide a protective layer on them so that we don't chip any of the paint off or knock any of those basing materials off. And so that's what we use a varnish for. So let's head down and have a look at some of the different varnish options that we've got.
So here we've got our 4 miniatures from Clank Legacy, and I'm going to use these guys at the start of the video to show you the quickest and easiest way to varnish your minis, and that's by using a spray varnish. And these are my 2 spray varnishes that I have. The one on the left is my original one, and I got it from an art supply place, but then I ended up getting the one on the right, the testers there, because the one on the left I found to be too easy to add just that little bit too much, and then it ends up drying with a bit of a gloss finish. This testers one here is by far and away the most commonly used varnish, so that's why I went and bought that one, and this one was really good. This is the one that I'm going to keep on using. So as you saw, I just started by shaking the can, and then to spray the varnish on, we just use the same sweeping motion that we use when we're priming. So you start your spray pattern off the mini, sweep across, and then finish off of the mini, and you want to be hitting it from about 6 to 12 inches away, somewhere within that range. And you just want to be careful that you're using just thin layers. It's better to do 2 or 3 thin layers rather than just 1 thick layer, and that's because this is a matte varnish, and so when it dries we want it to be as clear as possible and to have no reflection to it. And that's how these miniatures from Clank Legacy look. They've had 1 thin coat of that Testers matte varnish, and you can see nowhere that is supposed to be a matte or non-reflective finish has any shine to it. Nowhere looks glossy. Here's just a quick little comparison between those 2 spray varnishes. The Testers is the one on the left, which I showed just then. The one on the right is my original varnish, and you can see it just has that shinier finish to it, which is why I'm going to keep on using the Testers. So here we have the 4 miniatures from Detective City of Angels that I've been using in this series so far, and I'm going to use these to show you how we can use a brush-on varnish as opposed to a spray-on varnish. Sometimes I think it's better to use a brush-on varnish because with these minis, they are quite a bit smaller than the Clank Legacy ones, and I find that with these smaller minis that have the smaller details and smaller crevices and things like that, if you're not really careful, the spray-on varnish can pull in those crevices a bit, and if it goes on a little too thick, then when it dries, it's going to dry with a bit of a gloss finish. It's going to be a bit too shiny, and if the surface is not supposed to be reflective, then that gloss is going to stand out. Now we want to be using an old brush for this because the varnish is going to ruin the bristles, so I'm just using one of my old original brushes that I don't use for painting anymore. So just like the spray varnish, this one is also matte because we want it to be drying completely see-through with no glossiness to it at all, and we don't even want it to be noticed because none of the surfaces of any of these minis should have any reflection to them. So it just goes into the dry palette like you saw there. The amount that I've put down there is plenty for these 4 small minis, and as it's going on, you can mix just a little bit of water in with a brush just to thin it out just that little bit, make it go on a little bit more smooth. Now, just the main thing with brushing it on is that you just want to make sure that in any of the spots where a raised surface meets a flatter surface, so like where his tie meets his jacket, or where his left arm, the one without the gun, meets the other part of his jacket, they're right where I'm just touching the brush at the moment. You just want to make sure you pay attention to how thick the varnish is in those spots, because those are those areas where it can pull a bit too thick, and if this matte varnish dries too thick, it's not going to dry completely see-through, and it will end up drying with some amount of glossiness to it. And we want this to be totally matte, no reflection at all, and if you have some spots that have that reflection to it, it's going to stand out against the matteness of the other surfaces. And you can see with these minis now dry, they've all had one coat with the brush on varnish. It just looks like the outermost layer is just the paint. There's no shine or reflection where there shouldn't be, and that's the idea of our matte varnish. So that's showing you how we use a spray and matte varnish to protect our minis and have no reflections, but sometimes though you may actually want to have that glossy finish to certain parts of your mini. And so I'm going to use the Formula Spawn here from Mansions of Madness to show you how we can use a gloss varnish on certain parts to get that reflection or that wet kind of look depending on the different surfaces. So again, the gloss varnish is a Vallejo one, just gone into the dry palette there. And I'm using that on the eyes here because I want them to look like they're a bit wet and have that reflection like eyes normally do. And I'm also going to use it on the different mouths to make it look like they've, got saliva and that they're a bit wet, and just to give it that kind of grosser sort of look, because those parts do actually have some shine, wetness, reflection to them, and I want that to stand out against the matteness of the rest of the mini. So I laid a matte varnish down first, just with my spray varnish on the whole mini first, and now I'm just finishing off with the gloss varnish in these different parts that I want to be shiny. So that varnish has had a good bit of time to dry now, and you can see the different finish that it gives. So the eyes and the mouths have got that good shine to them, the reflection, and so with the eyes it makes them look like, that they are a bit wet and reflecting like what eyes normally do, and the mouths like they've got saliva in them and that they are just reflecting that light. It just gives that good contrast, that nice end finish between the parts that should be reflective and the parts that aren't going to be so much. And so with this dude here from Wildlands, I'm going to use the gloss varnish on that orb that he's holding in his hands, because I want that to appear as though it's shiny and that it's reflecting the light, and that it doesn't just have that matte finish like what the rest of the mini does. And so just like before, the varnish goes into the dry palette, and then I'm just carefully painting it on just where I want to have that shiny finish to it. And so you can see, just as I pan around there, the different finish that it gives compared to the matte surfaces around it. And the idea here is that it's just giving it that glass-like finish, and that it's reflecting the light, whereas the surfaces around it just aren't. And with this guy here from Arcadia Quest Inferno, I'm just going to use it to make his eyes have that glassy, wet, reflective look, just like with the one from Mansions of Madness. So you can see here the way that it's starting, there is no shine to it at all. But by the time it dries, it's going to look as though there is a bit of water on his eyes and reflecting that light. And now that it's dry, you can see that it's given it that cool reflective surface, which is adding just that extra little bit of realism, because some parts are going to be shiny, some parts aren't, and it's great to pick them out and just give that little bit of contrast there. And with this creature from Mansions of Madness, I'm going to use the gloss varnish on his mouth and on his eyes. So for the mouth, just to make it look like it's full of saliva, and again his eyes, just to give it that glossy, wet, reflective finish. And you can see the effect that it has there. It's so simple to put this on, but it just gives that cool little extra finish just to add a little bit of realism. And with this mini from the Faceless, I just want to give that glassy look to both sides of the mirror, that portal where she's being dragged through. And so I'm going to put the gloss varnish down there, and then when that dries, it'll just give that high reflection finish to that part, which is just going to help to reinforce the fact that it's a different material to that metallic frame around the edge, and that it is that more mirrored sort of finish, and that's given by the high reflection that you get from the gloss varnish. And so with it dry now, you can see the way that the gloss varnish just reinforces the fact that that portal is a different material to the frame around the outside, and that it has that reflection. And I think it just adds a really cool extra element, and like I said before, a bit of that realism. But in each of these cases, the matte varnish goes down first, and then the gloss varnish goes afterwards. And the last way that I'm going to show you to use a gloss varnish in this video is to make a certain part of a miniature look like it's made of a harder material than other parts. So if we just have a look at the picture here of the Royal Guard from Imperial Assault, you can see that its robes are clearly made of material, but then that its helmet has more of that almost plasticky metallic look. It's clearly more solid than what the robes are. So then as we come back to the actual miniature, we're just going to use the gloss varnish on the helmet to make it look like it's made of that harder material, and that the robes are that just flowing material that's not going to be reflecting any light. And now that it's dry, we can see that we've got that good impression that the helmet and the robes are not supposed to be made of the same thing. The helmet is that more plasticky, reflective type material, and that the robes are just that normal flowing material that won't be reflecting any light. And that's going to do it for this video and this series for the moment. So thank you very much for checking these videos out. I hope you found them useful, and that I have been able to show you that painting minis can be done by anyone. You don't have to be able to paint to a crazy high standard or to have an artistic flair. Anyone really can do it, and you can paint to whatever finish you want to. If you just want minis to be the color that they're supposed to be, then just base coat and stop there. Or if you want just basic contrast, just do a wash. And then for basing, if you just want to keep it simple, just do a black base. You don't have to go over the top. But this is a really fun hobby to be part of, and I want as many people to be doing it, and don't let your impression of your own abilities get in the way. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with these videos as they keep coming out. But until next time, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.